Hi friends, this is Bakappa. Welcome to Playwright with TypeScript full course. In this chapter 6, majorly I have covered about Playwright API automation testing and API mocking. In the API automation testing, I have covered how to set up the API testing environment, how to create, get API request, post API request, put API request, patch API request, and delete API request. And I have covered many other topics in the API automation testing. In the API mocking, I have covered how to mock the API requests, API response, and also I have covered how to mock the API requests from the HR file. So with this, let's get started with the chapter 6. In this Playwright tutorial, I will be discussing about how to create post API request using static request body in Playwright and TypeScript. Firstly, we will see the manual use case, and then we'll create a simple JSON file. So that is where we are adding the static API request body, and we will quickly create a spec file, and we will start automating the post API request using Playwright and TypeScript. And next we are going to see how to print JSON API response, how to validate status code, status text, and also we are going to see how to validate what type of response we are getting it from the application server. And then next we are going to see how to validate the properties or keys from the API response. And finally, I will be talking about how to validate API response. Before we discuss the manual use case, so let's set up the environment. So we are going to use the booking API collections. So we have created this Postman collections during the API testing using Postman full course. So if you do not know about the Postman, you can simply refer this playlist in the YouTube. You can search with the Postman by tester stock. So here you will get the very first playlist, Postman by tester stock here. Go to this playlist and you can learn about the Postman. And next question you might be having, how you can get the this Postman collections, right guys, whatever the APIs we have created. So again, it is very simple. In the YouTube, we can search with the Postman collections by tester stock. So if you search with these keywords, so here you will get the very first video. So it is just 2 minutes, guys. So by referring this 2 minutes video, you can get the API collections, which we are going to use it in this full course of API automation testing using Playwright and TypeScript. Now let's see the manual scenario. So here I will be using the create booking API, and this booking API. So let's take an example where I am trying to book the room in a hotel. So I'm providing the first name, last name. So this API is very much similar to the room booking in the hotel. So we will be providing all this information. So what is the total price, whether I have paid the amount or not. So what is the check-in date and what is the checkout date? And is there any additional need for this particular customer? Okay. So if I click on the send, so it is going to return me the one unique ID, booking ID. So by using this booking ID, so I can get the details about this particular customer. So what is the first name, last name? So what is the total price, whether amount is paid or not? And here you can see the check-in date and checkout date. And also you can see the additional need needs, that's another attribute we are having in the API request itself. Whatever you are providing all the information over here, so that information will be stored in the application server. And finally, we got the API response as 200 and OK, right guys? So we are going to create the post API request using Playwright and TypeScript. So by using this particular URL and this API request body. So we will make the post API request, and after making the post API call, so we are getting the response as 200. So we will see how to validate 200 as a status code, and then we will see how to validate the status text also. Okay. So sometimes we will be getting the created here, right? So we will see both status code and status text, how to validate it. And next we are going to see how we can validate the all the properties or keys are present or not. And respective value also we will validate it. And if there are any nested JSON objects like this, so we will see how to validate the nested JSON object also. And finally, we will be discussing about how to validate the response type. If you see here guys, so this is returning us the JSON response, correct, from the application server. So it depends on the service. So some APIs might return the XML type of response also, right guys? So let's quickly go to the VS Code and we will automate this particular scenario. So here I'm firstly creating the one JSON file. So that is where I'm adding the this API request body. So I will copy this API request body, and here I will go to the test-data folder. I'm creating one folder called API underscore requests. So inside this folder, I'm creating a file called post API request dot JSON. So that's it. I will add the post API request body here. So here I need to pass the first name and last name. So here you can give the any valid names or invalid names. So there is nothing like that. You can provide the this particular name only. So here I will provide Playwright TypeScript by tester stock. So similarly, I will give the last name as Playwright JavaScript by tester stock. So you can give the first name and last name. Even you can update the other property and respective value also. Doesn't matter. You can simply pass the string value here for additional needs. Even for dates also you can pass the string value. And for deposit paid you need to pass the boolean value. And total price is accepting the any integer value. So make sure that you are providing the appropriate details in this post API request body. So that's all about the creating the post API request body in the JSON file. So let's quickly create the fresh chapter here under the tests folder. So we are starting with the chapter 6. So let's create a chapter 6 here. So under chapter 6, I'm creating the new spec file called 01 underscore post API request underscore static dot spec dot ts. So that's it guys. We have created a fresh spec file. Now I will go to the one of the spec file and I will copy the test from the previous spec file. Again, I will come back to the new spec file and I will paste it here. So I will delete all these unwanted lines and then I will update the test title here as create post API request using static file in Playwright and TypeScript. Now let's import the this JSON file and also we'll set the base API URL. So let's import the JSON file now by using the import statement. So here I will give the variable name as post API request. So here I'll say from, and then we have to specify the location of the JSON file. So here we have the test data folder. Under that we have API requests. Under we have the post API request.json file. So that's it guys. We are done with importing the JSON file. So you can set the base API URL at the spec file level or you can set it in the project level. So you can add the base API URL in the playwright.config.ts file also. So this is where you can add the base URL. But if you are working in the UI automation and also if you are working in the API automation, so this will create an issue, correct? So that's a reason for a safer side. So you can specify it in the spec file only. So here what I will do is, so firstly let's get the base URL. So here this is our base API URL. So I will copy this URL and I'll keep it in the .env file. So here I will give the keyword name as base API URL. Then I will assign the API URL as https://restful-booker.herokuapp.com. So we have to access this particular key to get this particular value. So again, I will go back to the spec file. So let's access the base API URL in the spec file. So what I will do here is in the spec file. So I will use the test dot. So here I will call to the method called use. So inside this use, I'm passing the one object called base URL. So this is where I'm accessing the .env property here. So here I'll say process.env dot and followed by that we have to specify the key name. So that's it guys. So we are done with getting the base API URL. Now we can create the post API request. So I will come back to the our test. So if you see here, so here we are using the page for the UI automation testing. So if you are automating the APIs, so here you need to get the API request context. So that's the reason here I'm simply specifying the request, which is of type API request context, right? Now by using this request, I can create the post API request in Playwright. So let's quickly create the post API request now. So here I'll say await followed by that. So simply I will use the request object here dot and here I'll say post. So this method is accepting multiple parameters, but I will pass only two parameters. First one is the URL and second one is we have to pass the API request body. So here we are reading the post API request body. So this we have to pass it here. So here I'm giving the property name as first data. For this data property, I'm assigning the post API request JSON object directly. So that's it, guys. Now here we have to specify the URL to create the booking, right? So let's go to the Postman, and this is where we are passing the unique URL. So let's copy that to create the booking. So let's paste it here. So that's it, guys. So after making this post API call, so it is going to return us the API response. So that's the reason here I'm assigning back to the one variable called post API response. So that's it, guys. So this particular variable is holding the post API response. So let's convert this response into the JSON response and let's print that. So here I'll say await followed by that post API response dot JSON. So this is another method which will convert your response into the JSON response type. So that's it. So once we convert the API response into the JSON type, I will assign back to the one variable called constant JSON post API response. So here I have assigned to the one variable called JSON post API response, right, guys? So we have to print this particular response body. So here I will print the JSON post API response by using the console.log statement. So here I'll say post API response. So before printing the JSON post API response, I will convert this into the string. So by using the JSON dot stringify. So here I am passing the JSON post API response plus. So I will pass the another two parameters. So second parameter here is null because I don't want to update this particular data here. So that's the reason I'm passing it as a null. And third parameter I'm passing it as a 2 to print the proper spacing in the JSON object. So that we are converting into the string. So after converting it into the string also, it should print the appropriate JSON type of data. So that's the reason I'm passing it here as a 2. So that's it, guys. We are done with creating the post API request using Playwright and TypeScript. Now it's the time to run the test and let's check the result. So I will run the test now. So let's go back to the our output screen. And if you see here, guys, so our test is perfectly working fine. It is passing. And here you can see that the booking ID. So same details we are able to see it in the our, our Postman API testing tool also, right? So here we are able to see the booking ID and rest of the booking details, right? So this is how you can create the post API request in Playwright. So far you have seen how to create the post API request in Playwright, and also you have seen how to print the JSON API response. Now let's see how to validate status code, status text and response type. So if you go to the postman. So we will validate the this status code as 200 and OK as a text. And also we are going to assert the content type as application slash JSON. So let's go to the VS Code and let's add the assertions. So here I will use the expect, and inside the expect, so I will get the post API response dot status. So this status method will give me the status code. And after that, once I got the status code, I will be calling to the method called to be. And inside the to be, I can pass the expected value here. So in my case, 200 is the expected value. So similarly, I can validate the status text also. So there is another method called status text. So this returns me the status text. And if you see here guys, so we are having the OK as a text. So let's assert this also. So here I will say OK. Now let's add the validation for the response type. So once again I will use the expect, and inside that again I will use the post API response dot headers. So by using the headers, I am getting the content type here. So here I'll say content hyphen type. So this will returns me the content type from the post API response. And after that, here I'm using the to contain method to compare the response type from the API response. So expected value here is application slash JSON. So we are expecting the JSON type of response, correct? So that's it guys. We have added the validation for validating the status code, status text and response type. Now let's run the test and we will see the test results. And if you see here guys, our test is perfectly working fine. So let's go to the output. And if you see here guys, so our test is perfectly working fine and we are able to create the booking here, correct? So this is the new booking. So this is the positive scenario. So let's say intentionally I will pass the some invalid expected code here. So this time our test should get failed because whatever we are getting the response status code is different, and whatever we are expecting is different. Whatever we are getting from the application server is different. And if you see here guys, so status codes are not matching. So this is the expected failure, right? So this is how you can validate the status code, status text and response type in Playwright. Now let's see how to validate property names or a key names. If you look at this particular API response, so here we are having the property names under the booking JSON object. So we will see how to validate these key names which are present under the booking. And if it contains the nested JSON object also, so simply you need to follow that hierarchy. Let's say for example I want to validate the check-in key is present or not. So firstly you need to access booking, and after that you need to specify the booking dates. Then this particular booking dates JSON object should have the check-in key name, right? So firstly let's add the validations for the first name and a second name which is under the booking. So let's go to the VS Code now. So before I add the validations, so here I will add the some comments for understanding purpose. So here I'll say create post API request And then, so here we are printing the print JSON API response. And then here we are validating the API response. So here I will say at the end, validate property array key names. So again, I will use the expect. By using the expect, we can validate the property name array key name. So again, I will use the JSON post API response. By using this, so I will specify this particular object, that is the booking as the JSON object. Under booking only we have the first name and last name, right? So that's the reason I will add the booking here after the JSON post API response. Then here I will call to the method called to have property. So here we have to specify the property name, which key you want to validate it. So here I want to validate the first name and last name. So let's add the first name and last name here. So let's copy the same line. Then I will add the validation for the last name also. So let's copy the last name and add it here. So that's it, guys. So let's run this test and later we will add the validations for the other keys which are present inside the nested JSON object. So let's run the test. And if you see here, guys, our test is perfectly working fine. So there are no failures, right? So we are able to create the fresh booking. So now this time, so we are going to validate the check-in field and checkout fields are present inside the booking dates or not. So let me come back to the VS Code. So again, I will copy the same lines of code and I will paste it here. So those two fields are present inside the booking dates. So that's the reason I will copy the booking dates object. So I will put it after the booking. So why I'm putting after the booking is, if you look at this structure, so firstly we have the booking and then we are having the booking dates. So that's the reason I'm entering the booking here, booking dates after the booking here. And let's specify the property name here. So first one is the check-in and the second one is the checkout. So let's add the check-in here and this one is the checkout. So that's it, guys. We are done with writing the code. So let's run the test now. So it should get pass. And if you see here, guys, our test is perfectly working fine. And if you see the output, so we are able to create the fresh booking. So there are no failures at all. And if you pass the, let's say for example, I will pass the incorrect field name. I'm expecting some other field inside the booking dates, but this field is not present. So if you see this output of test run, so it will tell clearly saying that, so whatever you are expecting, so this is not found, right? So this is the expected failure. So far you have seen how to create the post API request, how to validate the status code, status text, and also you have seen how to validate the property names or a key names. Now let's see how to validate API response body. If you look at this API response, so we are getting the booking ID. So firstly, we will check this booking ID is greater than 0 or not. And also we will make sure that whatever we are passing the first name and last name, that same value is present in the response or not. And also we will validate the nested JSON object respective value. It can be the check-in date or a checkout date. Whatever we are passing it, the same value we should get it in the API response. Let's go to the VS Code and let's assert the firstly booking ID. So here I will say validate API response body. So that's it. Now here I will use the expect to validate the API response body. So I will take the JSON post API response, and by using this I can get the booking ID. If you look at this postman API response, so we are getting the property name as booking ID. So we have to make sure that this value is not 0. Always it should contain the some numeric number. So that's the reason I will take this booking ID, and here I will call to the method called to be greater than. So here I will say 0. So this booking ID should be always greater than 0. So that is the expected result what we have. So if it is 0, that means it is not created a proper booking, right? So this is how you can assert the booking ID. Now let's assert the first name and last name. So first name is present inside the booking. So that's the reason. So after the JSON API post API response, so I will add the booking, and then here I'll say first name. So here I want to compare the first name from the API response with the actual value, sorry, expected value. So here I'll say to be, and here we have to specify the expected value. So let me copy and paste it once again. Here I want to validate the last name also. Now let's specify the expected value from the JSON request body. So this is what we are passing on to the application server by using the post API call. So this is the first name. So let's add the first name here, and this is the last name. So let's add the last name in the expected value. So that's it, guys. So let's run this test, and later we will validate the nested JSON object values. So let's run this test, and it should get pass. So it is not working fine because in the previously we were discussing about validating the property, right? So here we were added the incorrect value. Let's add the proper value so that it will work fine. So here I'll say checkout now. So let's run the test, and there should not be a problem now. And if you see here, guys, so our test is perfectly working fine. And if you see the output here, so it is passed, and we are able to create the fresh booking here, correct? Now let's add the validations for the nested JSON object value validation. So I will copy this particular line. So I want to validate the check-in now. So which is present inside the booking dates. So I will copy this. So firstly we have to add the booking, then booking dates, and after that we have to specify the check-in field name. So here I have added booking, and then I will add the booking dates. Then here I will add the check-in. And here we have to specify the expected value. So expected value is present inside the our JSON file. So let's get the expected value. So that's it, guys. So let me add the checkout validation also. So here I'll say field name as checkout. So let's add the expected value here. So whatever I'm passing in the API request, same data should be present in the response also. That is what I am trying to make sure here. So here we have added the validations for the nested JSON object values. So if I run this test, and it should work fine. And if you see here guys, our test is working fine. So there are no failures. So if you see here, so this is the unique booking ID, what it has created. So if you pass any incorrect expected value, so this test will get failed. So this is how you can create the post API request by using the static file in Playwright and TypeScript. In the previous Playwright tutorial, I have discussed how to create post API request using static API request body. And in this video, I will talk about how to create post API request using dynamic API request body in Playwright and TypeScript. So let's start creating the dynamic API request body JSON file. So here I will navigate to the Postman. So previously we were passing this entire JSON object in the JSON file, and directly we were reading it and we are passing on to the post API request. So this time what we will do is, so we will pass the first name, last name and total price. In many cases you need to pass the test data from the test itself, or you need to generate the dynamic test data by using the plugins. So firstly we will see how to pass the test data from the test itself, and in the next tutorial I will be talking about how to generate the data at runtime by using the plugins also. So let's copy this API request body and let's create a one file under the API underscore requests folder. So here I will give the file name as dynamic underscore post API request dot JSON. So I will add the post API request body here. So here what I will do is, so we are going to pass the first name, last name and total price from the test itself. And in the next tutorial, we will see how to pass the dynamic data from the using the plugins. So here what I will do is, in the curly brackets, simply I will add the index numbers. So firstly, I'm passing the 0 inside the curly brackets, and second I'm passing the 1, and similarly here I will pass the open and close curly brackets, and inside that I will pass the 2. If you want to update any of the fields, you can add the next index number within the curly brackets. Say for example, I want to update the additional needs field. So here I need to pass the 3 within the curly brackets. So this is all about creating the dynamic post API request JSON file. Now let's quickly create a utility method which will accept the data of this JSON file and test data which we want to update it in the runtime. So what I will do is, so simply I will copy this function. So it is very simple function what I have written, and I will go back to the our project, and inside the src folder, so I am going to the utils folder. Here I'm creating a one file called API helper.ts. Then I will paste this function. So this is the exportable asynchronous function. So we are going to call this format API request function from the test. And then we are passing the first parameter as the this particular JSON data as a string. And second parameter is, so we are passing the array. So in this JSON file, we are updating the all these fields. So we are creating a one array and we are passing the that array to the this format API request method. And at the end, this is going to return us the string type of data. So if you look at this particular return statement, so by using this string, what we are doing is we are using the replace method. So wherever we are having the index numbers within the flower brackets. If you see here guys, so here we are having the open and close flower brackets, that is nothing but the curly braces. And here we are passing the index numbers. If you look at the our Postman API request body JSON file, right? So which will replace each and every curly bracket values from this particular given string. And at the end, it is going to return us the string type of data. So that's a bit about the format API request. Let's quickly create a spec file now. So here I will go to the tests folder and inside the chapter 6. So already we have created a one spec file. So simply I will copy this spec file and I will paste it inside the chapter 6 only. So let's rename the spec file name as 02 post API request underscore dynamic dot spec dot ts. So that's it. So let's go to the new spec file. And here I will update the firstly test title. So here I'll say create post API request using dynamic API request body in Playwright and TypeScript. So that's it guys. So here previously we were reading the JSON file. I will delete that. So let's import this particular function in the spec file now. And after that, so we are going to read that particular JSON file, what we have created in the initially, and we will pass on to the format API request method. So by using the import statement, so I will import the format API request function in the spec file. And after that, so I will do the another two imports. One is the path to get the JSON file location, and another one is the fs from the fs to read the JSON file. So here I'll say import. So I'll say path from. So I will specify the path here. And similarly, so I will import the fs from the fs to read the JSON file. So that's it. Now, so by using the path, I will get this JSON file location. So here I'll say path dot, here I'll say join. So I will call to the method called join. Inside this, I will pass the underscore directory name, and followed by that, so I will have to specify the location of the JSON file. So here I will go to the my project and I will right click on the JSON file what we have created in the beginning of this tutorial. So simply I will copy the relative path and I will paste it inside the join method. So this is our file path guys. Then I will assign back to the one constant variable called file path. So right now we are having the file path. We want to read this particular file by using the fs. So here I'll say fs dot read file sync. You need to call to this particular method to read the content of the JSON file. And here we are passing the file location. So where exactly we are having the file. And after that, I'm passing the data format, in which format I want to read the data. So here I will pass the UTF-8. And after reading the data, so I will assign back to the one variable called, so here I'll say JSON template. So right now we are able to read the data from this JSON file, and we are assigning back to the variable called JSON template. And if you look at this format API request method, so which is accepting the template, that is the JSON template what we are passing here. And next we have to pass the list of values which we are going to update in this API request body, correct? So let's create a one array. So where we are passing the all the values which we want to update at the runtime. So here I'm creating a one variable called values, so which is array. So let's pass the three value here. And if you look at this JSON file, so we are going to pass the first name, last name, and total price. So let's pass the first name. So here I will pass the Playwright TypeScript by tester stock. So you can pass any random values, it will work fine. So this is the first name I'm passing it. So let's pass the last name also. So last name I'm providing it as Playwright JavaScript by tester stock. Now we have to pass the total price. So here I'm passing the total price as 1000, right? Now we are having the JSON data in the form of string, and we are having the list of values. Now let's call the function which we have implemented here, and also we have imported in the current spec file. So I will copy this function name and I will use the await, and I will call to this particular function. So this function is accepting two parameters. One is the JSON template, another one is the array, right? Already we have created these two variables and respective values, right? So this JSON template contains the JSON data from the JSON file, and values contains the data which we want to update it in the at runtime, right? So after calling this method, right? So which is returning us the string type of data, right? So let's assign back to the one variable called post API request. So that's it. So once we are having the updated post API request body, right? So simply we have to pass this on to the our post function, right? So this is where we are passing the API request body. So if you look at this function which is returning us the string type of data, so we have to convert this into the JSON type of data. Then we have to assign to the data property. So here what I will do is I will use the JSON dot parse to convert the post API request string data into the JSON type of data. So let's call to the parse method, and we will pass the post API request variable here. So which will convert into the JSON type of data. Right guys? So we are done with writing the test now. Sorry guys. So let me add the comments what we are doing exactly here. Firstly, we are reading the JSON file, and here we are updating the post API request body, right guys? So it is very simple and straightforward. Now our test is ready. Let's run the test and we should be able to create the booking here by using the post method. And after that, we are doing multiple validations. So firstly, we are validating the API response, that is a status code, status text, and headers also we are validating. And here we are validating the key names. And at the end, we are validating the API response body, right? So it will work fine because I'm passing the first name, last name correct only, right? So if there is a mismatch, our test will fail. Let's run the test and see the results. And if you see here guys, our test is perfectly working fine. So let's go to the output and we are able to create the booking. Here we can see the unique ID and also we are able to pass the all the values whatever we are passing from the test, and we are able to pass that into the post API call, first name, last name here, and also here you can see the total price, correct? And our test is perfectly working fine. Now this time I'm going to pass the different values for the first name and last name. So here I will go to the again spec file. So firstly I will pass the, here I'll say Cypress by tester stock as the first name. So let's add the this particular validations in the first name expected value, and let's update the second parameter value. Here I'll say JavaScript by tester stock. So let's update this last name in the expected value also. So that's it guys. Now this time we should be able to create a booking with the first name as Cypress by tester stock and last name as JavaScript by tester stock. If you see here guys, so our test is perfectly working fine and we are able to create a booking. That means we are able to create a booking for the customers, right? With the unique ID here. So this is how you can create the post API request using dynamic API request body in Playwright. So far you have seen how to create post API request using static API request body. In this video, I will talk about how to create post API request using dynamic API request body in Playwright and TypeScript. We will be using a one plugin called Faker-JS. By using this plugin, we can generate the data at runtime. It can be first name, last name, or it can be some dates. And also you can generate the numbers also by using the Faker-JS plugin. Let's quickly install this plugin in the project. So here I will go to the VS Code and I will open the terminal here and I will enter the npm followed by install and followed by that at the rate faker-js/faker. So that's it. You can press enter. Once the installation is done, so we are done with installation and simply we have to import the faker in the spec file. So here I will be opening the 02 post API request underscore dynamic spec file. So let me maximize this window. So we have created this particular test in the previous tutorial. If you look at this one and in the line number 22. So here we are hard coding the first name, last name and total price, correct? So we will generate all these data, all these values at the runtime by using the faker-js plugin. So firstly, let's import it faker in the current spec file. So here I'll say import, followed by that. So I will specify the faker. So after that, you need to enter the from. In the single quotation, you need to enter the @faker-js / faker. Now let's quickly copy this test and I will paste it. So I will update the test title first. Simply I will add the to at the end of the title. So that's it, guys. So let's create the or let's generate the data at the runtime by using the faker. So here I will use the faker. So by using a faker, so firstly I'm generating the first name, then we will generate the last name, then we will generate the some random number, that is the total price. So let's generate the first name first. So I will use the faker dot person dot, you can call to the method called first name. So this will give you a runtime first name. So I will assign back to the one variable called first name. So similarly, let's create a last name also. So we have a last name method here. How we have the first name. So let's assign back to the variable called last name. Now let's generate the some random number. So by using the faker dot, here I'll say number property. After that, I'm calling to the method called int. And here you need to specify the minimum and maximum number. Means it will generate the in between number. Let's say minimum number is 1000 here. And here I will add the maximum number. So I will add the 10,000 here. So it generates the some random number between 1000 and 10,000. So let's assign back to the constant variable called total price. So that's it. So we are done with generating the test data at the runtime by using the faker plugin. So let's pass these variables into the array. So this is the first name. So let's pass the last name and then we will pass the total price. So that's it, guys. We are done with creating the post API request using dynamic API request body in Playwright and TypeScript. Before we run the test, so let's pass the first name and last name in the expected value. So if you go down here, so in the line number 96 and 97, we are validating the first name and last name in the API response. So let's pass the expected value as first name. So whatever we are generating at the runtime. And similarly, let's pass the last name expected value. So that's it, guys. Now let's run the test and it should generate the test data at the runtime and we should be able to create the booking. And if you see here, guys, our test is passing. Let's look at the output. And if you see here, so we are able to create the booking with the unique ID and we are also able to generate the first name at runtime and also you can see the last name also runtime. At the runtime, we are able to generate the first name and last name and also we are able to generate the total price. Correct? Now if I run once again same test, so it is going to generate the different test data to create the post API request. So if you see here, guys, our test is working fine. So let's check the output here. And this time if you see here, first name is different, last name is different, and total price is different here. So this is how you can create the dynamic post API request in Playwright and TypeScript. So far you have seen how to create post API request using static API request body and dynamic API request body. And in this video, I will talk about how to create post API request with the TypeSafety in Playwright and TypeScript. So this can be done by using three simple steps. The first one is we are going to create a interface that contains the fields which are present in the post API request body. And second step is we are going to create a one API helper method. So that is going to prepare the post API request body for us. And third step is simply we will call the API helper method in the spec file. That's it guys. It is very simple. Let's start with the creating interface. So I will go to the Postman and let's copy this API request body. So I will copy all the field names and respective values. So we will use it only the field names. So I will go inside the src folder and interface folder. So inside the interface folder, I'm creating a one file called booking api.interface.ts. So here we are going to define the or declare the all the fields. So let me create the firstly interface. So here I'll say interface followed by the interface name. So here I will give the interface name as booking API. So this is the first JSON object what we have, and I'm creating another interface. So if you look at this API request body fields, so we have the two JSON objects. So this part is the one. So second JSON object is booking dates. So that's the reason I'm creating another interface called booking dates. So that's it. So I will keep these two fields inside the booking dates. So let me delete this JSON object now. So here we have to give the field name and we have to say what type of data it is accepting, right? So let's start with the first name. So first name is accepting the string type of data, right? So let's pass the string here. And similarly, last name is accepting the string type of data. Total price is accepting the number type. And deposit paid is accepting the Boolean type of data. And additional needs is accepting the string type of data, right? So now let's come back to the, let's go to the booking dates. So check-in field is accepting the string type of data again. Even checkout is accepting the string type of data, right? So we are done with creating the interface. So we have created two interface. So in the first interface, we have defined 5 fields. In the second interface, we have defined the 2 fields. And if you look at this API request body, correct? So this is the entire post API request body, correct? So right now, so this object is separate. So that's the reason what you need to do is you need to declare another field as booking dates. So let's copy this object name and I will pass it here. So this is accepting the type of data is booking dates. So simply I will pass to the line number 7, right? So that's it guys. We are done with creating the interfaces for the booking API. Now let's quickly create a method in the API helper. So here I will go to the src. Under the src only, so we have the utils folder, and inside the utils folder I'm opening the API helper.ts file. So let's create a one simple function that will prepare the post API request body. So here I will say firstly export, which is the exportable asynchronous function. So here I'll say async, and I will give the function name as get post API request body. So that's it. So this is going to accept the parameters. So if you look at this particular interface, so we have to accept all these data: first name, last name, total price, and so on, right? So I will be parameterizing this particular method. So let's say firstly f name, that's the first name, which is of type string, right? So similarly, let's pass the last name, which is of type string, and then so let's pass the total price, which is the number. So here we'll say price, so which is the number, and then we have the deposit paid of type is boolean. So let me bring down this one, and let's add the rest of the parameters. So next we have additional needs, and we have the check-in and checkout dates. So let's add the additional needs, so which is of type is string, and let's add the check-in, so which is of type data is string type, and even checkout is accepting the string type of data. So that's it, guys. Now, so this method, so it is going to prepare the post API request body, and then finally it is going to return the post API request body by creating the by setting all the values, right? So that's the reason what I will do here is I'm creating one constant variable called API request, so which is of type is booking API, and inside this booking API, so already we have declared each and every field here, right? So let's get the each and every field here inside this, and we will set all these values to the so these fields. So let's start with the first name. So here I'll say first name, then I will assign the f name here, and similarly let's do it for the last name. So last name, so here we have the L name, and next we have the total price. So here I'll say price, and next we have the deposit paid. Let's add the deposit paid. So let's assign the deposit paid variable value here, and next we have the additional needs. So let's assign the additional needs to the current variable, and then next we have the booking dates. So let's get the booking dates field here, and this is the object, right, guys? So that's the reason you need to put it in the curly braces. So we have the check-in date. So here let's assign the check-in date value here, and similarly let's assign the checkout here. So that's it guys. We are done with preparing the post API request body here, right? Then at the end, I need to return this particular variable, right? So if I'm calling this particular method get post API request body, so it is going to get each and every value from that spec file, and it is going to assign the values to the respective fields. Then it returns this particular JSON object. So at the end here I'm saying return, and I will pass the API request variable here. So that's it guys. We are done with creating the one simple API helper method which is going to prepare the post API request body. So let's import this particular method in the spec file. So let's quickly create a one spec file inside the chapter 6. So here I will create a new file. So I will give the file name as 03 dynamic. Here I'll say TypeSafety underscore post API request dot spec dot ts. So that's it guys. So here I will go to the previous spec file. So let me copy the whole test from the previous spec file, and I will come back to the new spec file and I'll paste it here. So no need to worry guys. So I will explain each and everything here, whatever we are doing. It contains total 2 tests. So I don't need the first test here. So let me delete this. So let's import our API helper method which we have created. So I will copy this method name and I will come back to the spec file. So if you see here in the line number 4, already we are importing the format API request, right? So we are importing this particular method. In the similar way, let's import the get post API request body also. So here I will put comma. So which is coming from the API helper TS file only, correct? Now, so let's call the method. So simply I will copy this method name and respective parameter names. So I will go to the spec file, and so after the line number 30, simply I will paste the copied function name and respective parameter names. So here I will say await. After that, I will assign to the one variable, right? Because this is going to return as the post API request body. So that's the reason here I'm assigning to the one variable called post API request. So I will delete all this stuff which is not required. So I will delete the line number 26. So that's it guys. Now, so let's pass the each and every data to the get post API request body. So let's pass the first name here. So whatever we are generating by using the faker plugin. So let's pass the first name. Let's pass the last name, and let's pass the total price. And here we have to pass the boolean value. So here I'll pass it as a true. Additional needs we have to pass it here. So let's pass the breakfast as the additional needs for the customer, and let's pass the check-in date. So let me pass some value here. I'll say 2025 and then hyphen month 01. So here I'll pass 25, and let's pass the last parameter value as checkout date. So here I'll say 2025-01-27. So that's it, guys. Now let's delete this line also, which is not required. So actually we were updating the API request body in the previous session. So that we do not need it because we are preparing our post API request body by using the get post API request body only. Correct? So that's all, guys. Now, if you look at here in the line number 29, so here we are making the post API call, and here we have to assign the JSON API request body. So already this particular variable is containing the data in the format of JSON only, correct? So let's pass this post API request body directly here. So previously we were converting the string into the JSON object. So this time already this is the JSON object only. So that's the reason we are not converting it. That's all, guys. So if you are not using any methods after importing, you can delete it. Even you can delete the fs and path imports also if you are not using it. So that's all, guys. So we are done with firstly creating the interface. It contains all the post API request body fields. And second thing, we have created a API helper, which is going to prepare the post API request body. That is the get post API request body. And then, so here we have created a simple spec file and test. And we are simply calling this method here, API helper method. And we are passing all the data, whatever is required for the post API request. Now let's make sure that even validations are perfectly working fine. So let's pass the proper first name, last name. And if you come down here, so firstly we are validating the status code, status text, and content type, and field names also we are validating it. At the end, we are validating the API response body also. So here we are validating the first name, then last name, and here we are validating the check-in date and checkout date. So let's pass the correct check-in and checkout date. So if you see here, we are creating the booking with the this check-in date. So let's pass the check-in date properly here. So this is the expected check-in date in the API response. So after creating the booking. So let's make sure that we are passing the right expected value, right? So we are done with creating the post API request using TypeSafety approach. Now this is the time to run the test. So let's run the test and see the output. So if you see here, our test is passing. There are no issues. So let's look at the result. And if you see here, guys, we are able to generate the unique booking with the runtime data what we have generated by using the Faker plugin. So we are able to generate the first name, last name with the unique details. So let's try to run one more time. So this time our data should be different because we are generating the first name, last name, and total price data are different at the runtime. If you see here, guys, so all the data is different, right? So this is how you can create the post API request in Playwright and TypeScript using the TypeSafety approach. So far you have seen how to create post API request using static API request body and dynamic API request body. In this video, I will discuss about how to create get API request using Playwright and TypeScript. So let's start with discussing the manual use case. So here I will go to the Postman. So firstly, we will create the booking. So here I'm using the create booking API. And once we created a booking, so by using this unique ID, that is a booking ID. So here I am going to the get booking details API, and in the URI I am passing the booking ID here. If you see here, so currently 4237 is the booking ID. If you go back to the create booking, so this particular booking just now we have created. So we can get the resource details whatever you have created in the application server by using the get API call. So let's click on the send button. If you look at the API response here, so we are getting the particular booking details, correct? So already we have automated the post API call. So let's automate the get API call. So we will add the get API call on top of the post API call so that we can validate the booking details. So what we will do is we will validate the status code and status text, and also we will print the API response body in the output. So let's quickly create the new spec file in the VS Code. So here I'm creating a new spec file under a chapter 6. So here I will give the spec file name as 04 get API request dot spec dot ts. So that's it. So here I will go to the one of the previous spec file, and simply I will copy the test from the previously created spec file. Then I'll come back to the new spec file and I'll paste it here. So let me maximize this window, and here I will say the test title as create get API request using Playwright and TypeScript. So that's it, guys. So let me summarize what exactly this code is doing here. So here we are just generating the some test data by using the Faker plugin, and by using the get post API request body. So we are preparing the post API request body. And once we got the post API request body, so we are passing this to the our data property. And here we are making the post API call. And once we have the post API response, so simply we are printing it here in the line number 29, and then the line number 32 we are validating the status code, status text, and content type here. And then here we are validating the property names or a key names. And at the end, here we are validating the post API response body. And if you look at the line number 44, so here we are validating the booking ID. So we are making sure booking ID is greater than 0, correct? If you check this get API call, so in the URL we have to pass the booking ID, correct? So that's the reason what I will do here is, so firstly I will get the booking ID and I will save into the one of the variable. So let's start creating the get API call now. So here I'll say get API request. So here I will use the JSON post API response dot booking ID. Then I will assign back to the one variable called booking ID. So this particular property is returning as the booking ID. So that's the reason I am assigning back to the booking ID variable. That's it, guys. So by using the console.log statement, I will print the booking ID. So here I'll say booking ID colon, then simply I will pass the booking ID here. So that's it, guys. Now we have the booking ID. Now we can create the get API request using Playwright and TypeScript. So here what I will do is simply I will use the request.get method. So here I am calling to the method called get, and here we have to pass the URL, right? So if you look at the get API call URL, so this is a base URL, correct? No need to pass the base URL. Already we are passing it in the use method. So that's the reason we have to pass the slash booking, and booking ID we have to pass it here. So simply I will paste it here, and here we have to pass the booking ID. So this particular variable contains the booking ID. So simply I will paste it here, and I will put the dollar here. That's it guys. We are done with making the get API call. So we will get the response after making the get API call. So that's the reason. So I will assign back to the one variable called get API response. So by using the response, we can validate the status code, status text, and also we can print the API response body also. Now we have the get API response here. So let's validate the status code. So here I'll say validate status code, then I will say status text. I will use the expect for this to validate the status code. So simply I will take the get API response, then I will call to the method called status. So this method will returns me the, sorry guys, so let me put the await here. So that's it. Now I can use the directly get API response, then I will call to the method called status here. So this status will get the status code of the API response. So once I'm having the actual status code, and here I'm calling to the method called to be, and inside this method we have to pass the expected value. So expected value is 200. So if you look at here, so 200 is the expected status code. So similarly, let's add the validations for the status text. So here I'm calling to the method called status text, and I will pass the expected value as OK. So we are done with adding the validations for the status code and status text. So let's print the API response body. So firstly, we have to convert response into the API response into the JSON. So that's the reason I'm using the await, followed by that I'm taking the get API response dot. So here I'm calling to the method called JSON, so which will convert your response into the JSON format. Then I will assign back to the one variable called get API JSON response. So that's it guys. So once we have the JSON API response, we can directly print it. If you look at the line number 29. So here we are printing the post API response body. Similar way, we will print the get API response body here. So here I'll say get API response. So let me pass the get API JSON response variable here. So that's it guys. So what we are doing here is, so we are converting the JSON response into the string, and here we are passing the, so whatever the JSON response, and after that I'm passing the null because I don't want to update this particular data, whatever get API response, sorry, get API JSON response data is containing. So if you don't want to update anything for this data, simply pass the null and to here. So this is for the spacing purpose. So that's a bit about the creating the get API call by using the Playwright and TypeScript. So we are almost done with creating the automation code for the get API call. So let's run the test and check the output. So if you see here guys, so our test is perfectly working fine. So let's check the output here. So this is the post API response. Firstly, we are able to create the booking with the unique ID, right? With the unique data. And after making the call here, if you see here guys, so we are printing the get API response also, correct? And also we are printing the booking ID. So this booking ID, sorry, this booking ID and whatever we are getting in the post API response booking ID should be matching. The same booking ID is passed on to the get API response, right? So our test is perfectly working fine. So this is how you can create the get API request in Playwright and TypeScript. So far you have seen how to create post API request and get API request. In this video, I will discuss about how to pass the query parameters in get API request. So by using the query parameters, we can get the resource details which we have already created in the application server. So let's look at the manual use case first, and then we will automate the get API request using query parameters. So here I will go to the Postman. So firstly, we are going to create a booking. So this flow already we have automated it. And then we will go to the get API call query parameters. So if you look at this URL, right? And if you go to the params tab, so here I'm passing the first name, last name. So these are the runtime data. So I have stored the first name, which I'm passing in the create booking in the environment variables, and last name also I'm getting it from the environment variables. So whatever the data I have passed in the create booking API, so that data I am assigning here. So if I click on send, so this is going to receive the booking ID. So with this particular F name, that is the first name and last name, so we have one booking. So it is going to return us the 200 as a status code and OK as the status text. So we will see how to automate the get API call by using the query parameters. So let's start with the creating the spec file now. So here I'm creating the new spec file called 05. So here I'll say query parameters dot spec dot ts. So that's it. So here I will go to the get API request spec file and I will copy the code from the previous spec file. So I will come back to the new spec file and I'll paste it here. So here I'll say create get API request using query parameters in Playwright and TypeScript. So I have just updated the test title. So firstly, we are making the post API call here, and then we are validating the API response here. And from the line number 55. So we are making the get API call here, right? So here we are passing the booking ID. So previously we have automated by using the booking ID, we are able to get the resource details which we have already created by using the post API call. So this time we will validate whatever the resources we have created in the application server by using the query parameters, right? So simply I will delete this stuff. So before I update anything here, so here let's say create get API request using query parameters. So that's it, guys. Now, so I will come back to the line number 55. So this is where we are creating the get API call. So if you look at the our postman, so this is the get API call, and we are passing the first name and last name here, right, as a parameters. So let's add the firstly URL, and if you see here, guys, so this is a URL. I have already added it, and if you see here, so we have already booking here. Now, so let's pass the parameters. So if you just type params, so here we have the one property called params. So inside this params, we can pass the key name and respective value. So in our case, key name is, so if I go to the create booking, the key name is first name. So let's get the resource details by using the first name and last name. So here I'm passing the field name as first name, and let's get the first name value. So if you see the line number 17, so this is where we are generating the first name. So let's pass the first name field value, and similarly let's get the last name field name or a key name. Then let's assign the last name whatever we are generating by using the faker plugin. So that's it, guys. So we are done with creating the get API call by using the query parameters, correct? If you look at the below code here, so we are validating the status code and status text. And if you compare our query parameters API, so we are getting the 200 as a status code and we are getting the OK as a text, correct? And then, so at the end, we are printing the get API JSON response. So we are done with writing the code. Let's run the test and verify the output. If you look at here, this particular test is passing, and let's go to the output. So here we are able to create the booking successfully, and also we are able to get the booking ID by using the query parameter API call here, right? If you see the postman also, so here simply we are just, it is giving us the booking ID, correct? So this is how you can create the get API call by using query parameters in Playwright and TypeScript. So far you have seen how to create post API request and get API request using Playwright and TypeScript. In this video, I will discuss how to create put API request using Playwright and TypeScript. Firstly, we will discuss the manual use case, and then we will see how to generate the token, and by using the token, how to update the resource details in the application server by using the put API request. So let's start with the manual use case. So here I will go to the postman. So we will use the create booking API here to create the booking. So we got the booking ID here. So we will verify whether resource details are present in the application server or not by using the get API. Then here we have the post API call by using this post API, so we are generating the token. And once we have the token, so we will use the updating update booking API, which is a put API request. And here I'm updating the first name and last name. And if you see here, the API response also, so we got the appropriate first name and last name, whatever we have added in the put API call, correct? So if you see the get booking details API here, so we have the first name as Playwright TypeScript by tester stock, and last name is Playwright JavaScript by tester stock, correct? I think I have added some additional keywords here, doesn't matter. So we have updated the resource details currently by using the update booking API. So if I use the get booking details once again, right? So these details might have updated because we have done the update here by using the put API call. So let's hit this API. And if you see here, the latest first name and last name is Cypress by tester stock, and last name is JavaScript by tester stock, correct? So this is the very simple manual use case. So let's start automate this particular manual use case. So we have already automated the post API call and get API call. So firstly, let's generate the token. By using the token, we can update the resource details in the application server. So here I will go to the VS Code. So let's quickly create a one JSON file. That's where we are adding the token API request body. So here I'm creating a one JSON file called token underscore API underscore request dot JSON. So I will go back to the Postman and simply I will copy the token generator API request body and I'll paste it inside the token API request JSON file. So that's a bit about creating the JSON file and adding the API request in the token API request JSON file. Now let's quickly create a spec file under chapter 6. So here I will give the spec file name as 06. So here I'll say put API request dot spec dot ts. And here I will go back to the get API request dot spec dot ts file. Simply I will copy the test from the previously created spec file. Then I will come to the new spec file and I will paste it here. So let me maximize this window. So firstly, let's update the test title here. So here I'll say create put API request using Playwright and TypeScript. So let me explain you what exactly we are doing in this API. So firstly, we are generating the dynamic data by using the Faker plugin. And then here we are making the post API call. And then, so here we are printing the post API response body. Then we are validating the status code, status text, content type. So key names we are validating here. Then finally here we are validating the booking, create booking API response body also. And at the end, we are creating the get API request. And by using the booking ID, so we are creating the get API call and we are validating the created booking details are present in the application server or not. And if you see here, so next we are validating the status code, status text, and finally we are printing the get API response body, correct? Now let's start generating the token firstly. And once we have the token, we can update the resource details. So if you go back to the our Postman, and if you see the update booking, so we are passing this API request body with headers. If you see the headers, the very first parameter we are passing is content type, that is application slash JSON, and here we are passing the generated token, right? So we are generating the token here by using the post API call, correct? So by using the token only, we can update the resource details in the application server. So let's start generating the token first. So firstly, I will import the JSON file which we have just now created here, correct? So here I'll say import followed by, I will give the variable name as post API request. Then I'll say from. Then here we have to specify the location of the JSON file. So simply I will right click on the token API request JSON file and I will copy the relative path. Then simply I will paste it here. So that's it, guys. So we are done with importing the token API request in the current JSON file. So let's start creating the post API call to generate the token. If you see here, so this is a post API call, and by using this particular URL, correct? So we have to pass this URL. Let's copy this URL. So here I'll say generate token. Then here I'm using the await followed by that request object dot, here I'll say post, and inside this we can pass the URL first. So let's pass the URL, that is slash auth. Already we have specified the base URL in the use method. Now here we have to specify the API request body. So for the data property, we have to assign the token API request body, and this will returns me the token API response, right? So that's the reason here I'm assigning to the variable called token API response. So that's it, guys. Now by using this token API response, so let's validate the status code and status text. So if you see this API, so we are getting the status code as 200 and OK as the text. So let's validate these two things. So we have already done this. If you look at the line number 60 and 61, we are validating the status code and status text. So let's validate the status code as 200 and OK as the text. So let's pass simply the token API response here. That's it, guys. Now we have to get the token ID, correct? By using the token API response, we need to get this particular token ID so that we can pass on to the put API request. So directly this property is available inside the JSON API response, correct? So already we have the response here, right? So firstly, we will convert this into the JSON type. Then we can get the particular property value. So I will use the, sorry guys. So I will use the API response variable. I'll say await followed by that token API response dot. So firstly, I'm converting the API response into the JSON object. Then I will assign back to the one variable called token API JSON response. That's it, guys. So once you have the token API JSON response, directly I can use the property name after that. Simply I'll say dot and I will add the property name as token. So if I add the token there, I should be able to get this particular token number. So here I'll say token. That's it. Then I will assign back to the one variable called token. So just for the reference purpose, so I will print this token number by using the console.log statement. So here I'll say console.log and then I'll say token colon and then I will simply pass the token variable value here. So that's it, guys. So let me format the whole code and we are done with generating the token. So we will make sure that we are able to generate and print the token number. So let's run this test and see whether we are able to generate the token or not. So if you see here, so our test is working fine. So let's go and check the output here. So we are able to create the booking. So this is our booking ID. So this is a get API response here. And if you see here, so we are able to generate the token, correct? Now by using this token, so we will create the put API request and we will update the resource details in the application server. Let's start creating the put API request. So here I will go to the Postman and I will open the update booking API and simply I will copy the API request body here. So I will create a one JSON file for the put API request also. Under the API requests folder, I'm creating a one file called put underscore API underscore request dot JSON. That's it. So simply I'll paste the put API request body here. So here you can pass the any value for the each of the key names. Now let's import this put API request JSON file in the spec file. So once again I will go to the spec file, like how we are importing the token API request. In the similar way, we will import the put API request JSON file here. So here I'll say variable name as put API request and let's add the file name here. So here I'll say put API request dot JSON. We are done with importing the put API request JSON file here. Now let's start with creating the put API request by using Playwright and TypeScript. So here I'll say create put API request. So here I will start using the await again, followed by request object dot. Here I will call to the method called put. And inside the put, so we have to pass the firstly URL. So let's get the URL from the Postman. So if you see here, the put API call, so we need to pass the slash booking. And after that, we have to pass the booking ID. So let's copy this URI and let's paste it here. And here we need to pass the booking ID. So already we have the booking ID. If you see, if you go up here, here we are generating the booking ID, right? So we are basically by using the post API response, so we are getting the booking ID. So let's take this variable booking ID and let's pass on to the put API call URL. And then here we have to pass the two things. One is the headers and second one is the put API request body. So firstly, let's pass the headers, and headers is nothing but the object here. So let's add the headers first. So if I go to the Postman here, so this is our put API request. So if I click on headers, so we have the two headers here, right? So let's pass this content type first. So here I'll say content type colon. So let's pass the application slash JSON value here, and then let's pass the next key and value. So key name is cookie. So let's assign the token here. So we have to assign the value as token equal to token ID here, right? So let's pass the token equal to, and we have to pass the token ID here, correct? So that's the reason what I will do is here is, so already we are getting the token from the token API, right? So we are saving into the one variable called token. So let's pass the token here. So that's it, guys. We are done with adding the headers. So content type is not mandatory here. Without content type also it will work fine. Now we have to pass the put API request body. So by using the data property, so here I will use the put API request variable. That's it, guys. We are done with creating the put API request, and this will returns me the API response back. So let's assign to the variable called put API response. That's it, guys. Now let's start validating the status code and status text. If you see this put API request, so we are getting the 200 and OK. So let's validate these two things, and then we will print the put API response body. Like if I go above here for the get API call, so firstly here we are validating the status code and status text, and then we are printing the API response body, the line number 66 and 65 and 66. So let's copy this and simply I'll paste it here. So here let's pass the put API response for the line number 89 and 90. So firstly we are validating the 200 status code, then OK text, and then here I'll pass the put API response. So here we are converting the put API response into the JSON. Then we are saving that into the, here I'll say put API JSON response. Then I'll pass the same thing here. Then here I'll say put API response. So that's it, guys. So let me format the whole code, and we are done with writing the code. So let's execute the test and check the output. So here I'm running the test. And if you see here, so our test is passing. So let's look at the output here. So firstly, we are getting the post API response, and here we have the booking ID, and this is the get API response. Then we are generating the token, and this is the put API response here, right guys? So before updating the resource details, that is the first name and last name, if you see the first name and last name in the get call and post API call, so those first name and last names are different. So after updating the first name and last name, so these are the two latest first name and last name, right? So our test is perfectly working fine, correct? So this is how you can create the put API request in Playwright and TypeScript. So far you have seen how to create get API request, post API request, and put API request using Playwright and TypeScript. In this video, I will discuss how to create patch API request by passing the partial API request body. So let's start discussing the manual use case first. So we will create the booking by using the create booking API. Then we will check the booking details are present in the application server or not, whatever we have created in the create booking. Then we'll generate the token, and then we'll pass the partial API request body, and we will try to update the resource details in the application server. And if you see here guys, so we got the latest updated first name. And if you see the get booking details API, so we have the first name is different here, right? So after making the patch API call, so we are able to update the first name. So if I hit get booking details API, so I will get the latest first name here, correct? So this is all about the manual use case. So far we have already automated the create booking API, get booking details API, and also we are able to generate the token for the put API request. So only we have to create the patch API request using Playwright now. So here what I will do, right? So simply I will go to the partial update booking API. So simply I will copy the API request body, and then so under the API requests folder, I'm creating the one JSON file. So let's put the API request in the JSON file first. So here I'll say patch API underscore request dot JSON. So you can add the more field and respective values also. So just for the demo purpose, I'm just adding the only one key and respective value here. You can try adding the multiple fields and respective values. So let's quickly create a spec file under chapter 6. So here I will give the spec file name as 07 patch API request.spec.ts. That's it. Now I will go to the put API request.spec file. So simply I will copy the test from the put API request spec file. Then I will paste it in the new spec file. So firstly, let's update the test title here. So here I'll say create patch API request using Playwright and TypeScript. Then, so here we have to import the patch API request JSON file. So let's do that. So previously we were importing the put API request file. So let's import the this time patch API request body. So let's add the file name here. So that's it. We are done with importing the patch API request file in the current spec file. So let's create the patch API request. So here I'm coming down. So here we are creating the put API request. So here I'll say create patch API request, and previously we were calling the put method. This time I'm calling the patch method, and here we have to pass the booking slash and booking ID here. If you look at the Postman also, patch API call, we are passing the booking slash booking ID. And if you see here in the headers, so we are passing the content type as application slash JSON, and also we are passing the cookie as the token equal to token number. And if you see here, so headers also we are passing the content type and cookie. And here we have to pass the patch API request. Already we have imported it. So let's pass the patch API request JSON object here. Then, so let's update the variable names here. So after making this call, patch API call, so we will be getting the API response here. So here I'll say variable name as patch API response. So let's validate the status code and status text. If you see this patch API call, so we are getting 200 and OK. So let's validate these two values. So firstly, I will put the patch API response. Then, so firstly, we are validating the status code, then status text. So let's convert this into the JSON so that we can print the patch API response in the output. So here I'll say patch API JSON response. So after taking this patch API response, we are converting this into the JSON, and then by using the stringify method. So we are converting the JSON object into the string and we are printing in the output. So here I'll say patch API response. So we are done with creating the patch API request. Now let's run the test and look at the output. And we should be able to create the booking, and also we should be able to verify the booking details, and we should be able to update the booking details in the application server. And if you see here, our test is working fine. Let's verify the output. Firstly, we are able to create the booking. So this is our booking ID, and this is the post API response. And then here we have the get API response. Then we are generating the token here, and then so after making the patch API call, right? So just we have updated the first name here, right? So this is the patch API response after updating the booking details, right? So this is perfectly working fine. We are able to update the first name. You can try to update the rest of the fields. If you find any challenges, you can let me know. So this is how you can create the patch API request in Playwright and TypeScript. So far you have seen how to create get API request, post API request, put API request, and patch API request. In this video, I will discuss how to create delete API request. With this topic, so we will be automating the end-to-end API testing flow. So we will be creating the booking, then we will verify whether resource details are present in the application server or not by using the get API request. And we will update the resource details by using the patch API request. And then finally, we are going to delete the booking details by using the delete API method. So let's see the manual use case first. So firstly, we will create a booking by using the create booking API. Then we will check the booking details, and we will be generating the token to update the booking details, and we will be updating the booking details by using patch API request. Then finally, we are going to delete the booking details. After deleting the booking details, so we are getting the 201 as a status code and created as a text. And if you see the API response body also, we are getting that created. So far we have automated the post API call, get API call, and the token generator. And also we have automated the partial update booking API. Now let's start automating the delete booking API. So here I will navigate to the VS Code. So let's create a new spec file here under chapter 6. So here I'll give the spec file name as 08 delete API request dot spec dot ts. So that's it. Here I will go to the patch API request spec file. Simply I will copy the test from the previously created spec file. So I'll paste it. So let me explain you what exactly we are doing in this spec file or a test. So let me update this test title as create delete API request using Playwright and TypeScript. So firstly, we are generating the dynamic test data. So by using this, we are preparing the post API request body. So here we are creating the post API request. Then we are printing the API response. Then we are validating the status code, status text, and content type here. Next, we are validating the property names or a key names. Next, we are validating the API response here. Then we are making the get API call. We are validating the booking details are present in the application server or not here. Then here we are generating the token. So by using this token, we are creating the patch API request to update the booking details in the application server. And also we are doing the very less validations in the sense we are just validating the status code and status text. You can go ahead and validate the API response also. Now let's create the delete API request. So it is very much similar to the patch API request. So if you look at this postman, so here we have to pass the, in the URL we have to pass the slash booking and booking ID, and also in the headers. So we have to pass the two parameters, content type and cookie. So these two parameters are already we are passing for the patch API request if you see here. So already we are passing the headers, and also we are passing the slash booking and booking ID here. So in case of delete API request, no need to pass the API request body. And these validations are little bit different. In the delete API request, we are getting the 201 as the status code and created as a text. So these two validations are a bit different, but rest all of the things are very much similar to the creating the patch API request. So simply I will copy this and let's create a delete API request now. So here I'll say create delete API request. Then by using the request, you need to call to the method called delete method. And here we are passing the correct URL. And also we are passing the correct headers. So let's remove this API request body. For delete API call, API request body is not required. So after making the call, so we are getting the API response. So let's assign to the one variable called delete API response. So by using this delete API response, we need to validate the status code and status text. So status code is 201 and text is created. So if you see here, so we are getting the 201 and created. So let's print this delete API response body also by using the body method. So here I'll say just console.log and here I'll say delete API response and then simply I will use the await, followed by that I will use the delete API response dot body. I'm calling to the method called body, so that will returns me the delete API request, sorry, delete API response body. So we are just printing the delete API response body here. So we are done with creating the delete API request. And also we have added the very few validations. That is fine. You can try to validate the any API response if you are using the any other APIs. So let me format this code and then we will run this code. So let's run the test and verify the output. So if you see here, our test is working fine. So let's verify the output. So firstly, we are able to create the booking here. So this is the post API response. Then, so we are checking the booking details by using the get API call. And here we are generating the token. And then by using this token, we are updating the resource details. So here we are updating the first name. And then if you see here at the end, so we are able to make the delete API call and also we are able to receive the API response as a created, right? So this is how you can create the end-to-end API testing flow in Playwright and TypeScript. So far you have learned API automation testing using Playwright. In this video I will discuss what is API mocking, then what is the difference between API mocking and API testing, and at the end we are going to see what are the three ways of API mocking in Playwright. So let's understand firstly what is API mocking. API mocking is a technique to simulate the behavior of an API or a service without using the actual API. So we are not waiting for the actual API to be developed and given to the testing team. So we are going to mock the APIs. It can be API request or API response. And API mocking is extremely beneficial in various ways such as isolation. It allows you to test your own code in the isolation, and if you find any issues, those are related to the your code, not with an external APIs. Speed. So significantly you can speed up your development and testing process. And control. You can control the API response so that you can test the multiple scenarios and edge cases. So I have given the few examples here. So banking transactions or gift card transactions or any third-party APIs or services. So whenever you are using these kind of services or APIs, they may charge you whenever you make the API call. So that's the reason you need to use the API mocking approach. Now let's understand what are the differences between API mocking and API testing. So let's look at the very first aspect, the purpose. So in case of API mocking, so we are simulating the behavior of an API without using the actual backend logic here. But in case of API testing, so we will verify the actual API behavior, performance, and functionality of an API. Second aspect is when to use the API mocking and API testing. So we will be using the API mocking when real API is unavailable or incomplete. So we will be performing the API testing when real API is ready and needs an validation. And third aspect is environment. So we'll be using the API mocking approach if API is in the development process or before the development process. And if you see the API testing, so APIs will be deployed into the QA environment or staging environment. Then we will start performing the API testing. And fourth aspect is focus. So we will be creating the controlled and predictable responses in the API mocking. But in case of API testing, we are ensuring that API is working fine in various scenarios. And fifth aspect is response behavior. So already we are defining the for what input and what is the output we are expecting in case of API mocking. But in case of API testing, so real responses from the actual API we are getting it depends on the backend logic here. Next aspect is network calls. In the API mocking, there are no real-time network calls, but in case of API testing, we will see the real-time network calls to the actual API endpoint. And next aspect is error handling. In case of API mocking, so we are just simulating the very few errors, predefined errors or failures. But in case of API testing, you will be seeing the multiple real-time issues like such as 500 error or any network issues. And next aspect is testing types. So typically used in the unit testing or integration testing and development phases. And in case of API testing, we are covering the functional testing, performance testing, and security testing and load testing. So what are the tools we are using for the API mocking and API testing? So for API mocking, we are using the WireMock, Mock-on, Mountebank, Postman. But in case of API testing, we are using the Postman SOAP UI, REST Assured, JUnit, Gist, etc. we have in the market. And next one is use cases. In case of API mocking, so early stage development, and you can testing the interactions between the APIs before the API got completed for the real-time use. But in case of API testing, so we are verifying the full functionality of the API with respect to the security and performance of an live API. And next aspect is data source. But in case of API mocking, you will get the static and predefined data responses. But in case of API testing, you will see the real-time test data from the different databases or different APIs or services. And next one is cost. API mocking is low cost as no real-time API calls are made here. But in case of API testing, so it may incur cost. It depends on the API or a service you are using it. And also sometimes it will be rate limited APIs because you can make only few calls. So like that limitations also will be there for the some APIs or a services. And the last aspect is flexibility. API mocking is having the high flexibility in case of like we are just simulating the different scenarios and responses like whatever we want. But in case of API testing, when you're testing a real APIs, so you will have a less flexibility because testing is dependent on the actual API and its limitations. Correct? So far you have seen what is API mocking and what is the difference between API mocking and API testing. Now let's understand what are the three ways of API mocking in Playwright. The very first one is you can mock the API requests, and second one is you can mock the API response, and third one is you can do the API mocking from the HAR files, where we will be discussing about how to record the HAR file and how to modify the HAR file and how to replay from the HAR file. So far you have seen what is API mocking. Now let's understand how to mock API requests in Playwright. So everything I have written in the one single Medium article about the how to mock APIs in Playwright. So let's navigate there. In the Google, simply you can search with API mocking by tester stock, and you will get the very first link from the Medium. So let's go to this web page, and if you scroll down here, so you will see the mock API requests. So we are using the one URL called demo.playwright.dev/API-mocking. So we will be using this URL for the API mocking of request and response, and also we will be seeing how to mock the APIs using HAR files. So let's navigate to this URL, and if you see here, so it has a list of fruit names here. So let me inspect this web page, and here I will go to the network tab. So let me refresh this page once, and here I'm selecting the fruits API, and if you see here on the right side, so here we are getting the URL. So we will be using this particular URL to mock the API requests. So for example, right now you are seeing the multiple fruit names here, right? So whenever we mock the API requests, so we will be seeing the or mocked test data in this list here, right? So let's see how to mock the API requests now, step by step. So if you look at the very first step here, so simply we are using the browser context object, and by using that, simply I'm calling to the method called root, and inside that I'm passing the URL. You can see this URL which is present in the web page here, right? And after that, so this is the asynchronous root function, and inside that I'm creating the one JSON array which contains the JSON objects here. So which contain each JSON object contains the two properties. One is name and second one is ID. And after creating the JSON array, I'm fulfilling to the fulfill method. So this is where I'm passing the JSON array, right? And if you look at the whole test, correct? So firstly here I'm mocking the API request. So this is what the mocked test data I'm saying. And after that, here I'm saying you need to fulfill this particular JSON array. And then, so after navigating to this URL, so whatever I'm mocking the test data here, so this should be present in the web page, right? And later we are validating each and every values are or a test data is present in the web page or not by using the expect. So let's start creating the one simple spec file and test, and we'll start mocking the API request. And then at the end, we are validating the all the values or a test data which we have mocked in the root method. So here I will go to the VS Code, and I'm creating the new spec file under the chapter 6. So here I'll say 09 mock underscore API request dot spec.ts. So that's it. Here I will go to the one of the spec file and simply I will copy the test from the previously created spec file. So let me maximize this window. So let's delete all the lines from this test. And then, so here I will update the test title as mock API request in Playwright. So that's it. So we are done with creating a sample or a skeleton of the test. Now we have to mock the API request, right? So by using this page, I can call to the root method. So let's say await followed by that. So I will use the page dot root method. And inside this, we have to pass the firstly URL. So here I'll put the single quotes. So let's copy the URL. So let's copy this particular URL. Then we have to specify the star. So this is generic URL, then 2 stars. So this is the kind of base URL, and followed by that, I'm specifying the exact location of the API. So this is where I want to mock the API request. Then, so here I'll say async followed by root. Then here I'll say arrow. So inside this, we have to pass the JSON array. So here I'm creating the object called, variable called JSON. So let's create the JSON array here. So simply I will use the object here. So we have to provide the two property and respective values. The first one is name. So here I'll say you can give the any random value here. So here I'll say playwright TypeScript by tester stock. Then I will give the next property as ID. Then I will assign the value as some random numbers. I'll say 1, 2. Then, so let's pass the another few mocked test data. So I'll pass total 4 set of test data here. So that is nothing but fruit names in our case. So you can give any proper fruit names also, or you can give any random words also. So next data I'm specifying it as playwright JavaScript by tester stock. Then I'll say Cypress by tester stock. Then the fourth one is API testing by tester stock. So let's update the ID. So here I'll say second one as 1, 3, third one as 1, 4, and fourth one as 1, 5. So we are done with creating the JSON array which contains multiple sets of mocked test data. So let me format this test. So after creating the mocked test data or after specifying the mocked test data, so you need to fulfill the same test data by using the root.fulfill, and here you need to pass the object here, right? So let's pass the object here by using the await, followed by that I'm using the root dot fulfill. So inside we have to pass our JSON array. So we are done with passing the JSON array. So here I'll say comment as mock API request. That's it, guys. Now we have to navigate to the URL. So it will say go to URL. I will use the await followed by that page dot go to. And inside this method, we have to specify the URL. Sorry. So let's copy this URL and I'll paste it here. Now, so let's validate the text, whatever we are passing here. So by using the expect. So here I'll say expect await followed by expect. And after that, so we have to identify the element. I'm identifying the element by using the get by text. So we have to make sure that we have the element with the all specified mocked data text. So let's make sure that Playwright TypeScript by tester stock text is present in the web page. So here I'll say to be visible. So that's it. So similarly, so let's validate the rest of the three mocked test data or a text, whatever we are passing in the mocked API request. All the values should be there in the web page when we navigate to this URL. So let's pass the next, that is the second text Playwright JavaScript by tester stock. Then let's pass the Cypress by tester stock here. Then at the end, we have to pass the API testing by tester stock. So that's it, guys. So let me select all and format the code. So we are done with writing the code now. So let's run and check the Playwright test report. So here I will run the test. And if you see here, our test is passing. If you see here in the output also, it is passing. And if you see the browser also, so we are able to mock the API request, right? So we are able to pass the test data through the API mock, through the mocked API. There are 4 values are present in the web page, right? And even our test is working fine. So let's go to the report and verify the Playwright test report also. So here is a Revillian folder. And if you see here, guys, our test is working fine. So all the steps are passing. And here you can see the screenshot also. So we are able to mock the API request with the specified test data. So this is how you can create the mocking of the API requests in the Playwright. So far you have seen what is API mocking and how to mock API request in Playwright. In this video, I will talk about how to mock API response in Playwright. So here I will navigate to the same Medium article which we have opened it in the previous tutorial. If you scroll a little bit down here, so firstly I have covered the how to mock API requests in Playwright. Then second topic I have covered how to mock API responses in Playwright. So let's navigate to this topic. So let me explain you step by step how to mock the API responses in Playwright. So here I'm using the root parameter. By using that, I'm calling to the fetch method. So firstly, I'm fetching the test data which is present in the web page. And then I'm saving that into the response variable. And by using this response variable, I'm converting into the JSON object. And then in this JSON object, I'm adding the mocked test data. So if you see here, by using the push method, I'm adding the JSON object here. So which contains the two properties. One is name and second one is ID. So like this, you can add the n number of test data here. And finally, I'm fulfilling it by passing the response and JSON variable data here, right? Let's look at the complete test, how exactly it looks like. So if I scroll down, so firstly here we are mocking the API response. So as usual, we are using the same API URL in the root method. Then, so after navigating to this URL, so we are validating all the texts are present or not in the web page. So let's start creating a spec file and we will automate the mocking API response in Playwright. So here I will quickly create the one spec file under chapter 6. So here I'll give the spec file name as 10. Here I'll say mock underscore API response dot spec.ts. So that's it. Here I will go to the mock API request spec file. So simply I will copy the test from the previously created spec file and I'll paste it here. So that's it, guys. So let's update the test title first. So here I'll say mock API response in Playwright. So inside this root method, right? So let me update this comment. So here I'll say mock API response. So inside the root method, we are using the same URL. Already I have showed you how to get this particular URL. So if you navigate to this particular web page, demo.playwright.dev/API-mocking. So if I go here and inspect this web page and let's navigate to the network tab here. So if you refresh this page, so here we are getting the Fruits API. So from here we are getting this particular URL. So simply we are adding the generic URL here and inside this function root function. So we have to use the await and root parameter by using this. So here we have to call to the method called fetch. So we are calling to the fetch method to fetch the web page test data. So let's fetch the web page test data and assign back to the one variable called response. Then by using this response, I am converting this into the JSON object. Then I will assign back to the one variable called JSON. That's it, guys. Now for this JSON object, so we have to add the mocked test data here. So let's add it by using the push method. So here I'll say JSON dot push and inside this we have to pass the object. So let's cut this object and paste it inside the push method. And similarly, let's add the another three set of mocked test data. So it will say push. So similarly, let me add another two lines here. Then we will add these three JSON object in the push method. So I am adding the second one. Let's add the third object. And then let's add the final and fourth object here. So we are done with creating the mocked test data here, right? At the end, here we have to pass the response and JSON here, right? In this fulfill method. So already I'm passing the JSON here. So let's pass the response here before the JSON. So that's it, guys. So this is how you can create the mock API response object, and you can fulfill it by using the fulfill method. So here already we are navigating to the URL. So if you look at this particular URL, this is the same URL whatever we are using in this web application or a web page. Then, so here also I don't think we have to update anything. So simply we are identifying the all the elements by using the text. So whatever that data here we are mocking, right? So all the data is passed over here, right? So there is a Cypress by tester stock. Here you can see that. And at the end, we are validating API testing by tester stock is present or not here. Correct. So we are done with writing the test for mocking API response in Playwright. Now it's a time to run the test and check the Playwright test report. So here I'll run the test. And if you see here, guys, so already our test is working fine. So it is got passed. And if you see our browser also, so there is already existing fruit names are available. On top of that, so we have added the mocked test data here at the end, right? So this is how you can mock the API response in Playwright. And let's check the Playwright test report also. We should be able to capture the same screenshot in the report also. So here I'll say reveal in Finder. And if you see here, our test is working fine. So if I scroll down, so same web page screenshot you can see here, right? So we are able to create the mocking of the API response in Playwright. So far you have seen how to mock API request and how to mock API response in Playwright. In this video, I will discuss how to mock APIs from HIR file. So firstly, we will see how to record the HIR file and how to modify the HIR file and how to reply from the HIR file as a response to the API. So recording the HIR file is very easy and simple. So simply we have to use the browser context object dot root from HIR method. So we have to call to this method and then we have to pass the two parameters. The very first one is the location where we want to generate the .hier file, and second one is the object. And inside this object, so we are passing the URL, and then we are passing the another flag as true or false. So when we are recording the HIR file, so we have to set this flag as true, and second time no need to set for the true. You can pass it as a false when you are running in the, like if you do not want to generate the another .hier file. So let's look at the whole test, how exactly it looks like. So firstly here we are mocking the API by using the HIR file, and then so after navigating to this URL, we are verifying this particular text is visible in the web page or not. So when you record the HIR file, so in this particular location or a folder, so you'll be seeing the two files. The first one is bin file, and second one is .hier file. .bin file contains the web page data, and .hier file contains the web application information. So we will be adding the mocked test data inside the .bin file. If I scroll a little bit down, So we'll be adding the mocked test data inside the .bin file like this, right? So let's see how to automate the API mocking from the HR file. Let's quickly create a spec file under the chapter 6. So here I will give the spec file name as 11 underscore. So here I'll say mock from HR file dot spec dot ts. So that's it. So here I will go to the one of the previous spec file. So simply I will copy the test from the previous spec file. So I'll paste it. So let me maximize this window. So I will delete all the stuff which is not required for us. And then let's update the title here. So here I'll say mock API from HR file in Playwright. So firstly, we have to generate the .hr file, right? So here I'll use the await followed by page dot. Then here I'm calling to the method called root from HR. So here we have to pass the two parameter. First one is the location where we want to generate the .hr file and bin file. Then next one is the object, correct? So here we have to set the two property. One is the URL and then second we have to set the update flag. So first time you need to set this flag as true to generate the .hr file. So if you want to generate the new HR file every time, that means you can set the update as true. If you do not want to generate the .hr file every time, so you can set this flag for the false. So let's pass the URL here. So it will say star slash star star and then here will say slash. So let's copy the URL. So as usual, we are using this same web application demo.playwright.dev/API-mocking. So here we are using this fruits API. So let's copy this API URL and let's add the URL here. And here we have to say where we want to generate the .hr file. So here I'll say current project root folder. So that's the reason here I'm saying dot slash. So I will say create HR folder and inside this you create a fruits dot HR file. So that's it guys. So here we are mocking from the means here we are recording a HR file. So next step. So here we have to go to the URL. Then at the end we need to validate the text. So that's it. Let's navigate to the URL by using go to method. So here will say go to and here we have to pass the URL. So let's get the URL from here and I will paste it inside the go to method. Then so let's validate the text by using the expect. So it will say expect and inside the expect. So we have to pass the element, right? So it will say page dot get by text. And here we have to pass the text and I'm checking whether it is visible or not. So it will say to be visible. So let's pass the text. So after navigating to this URL, so I want to validate very first fruit name called strawberry. So this text should be there in this web page. That's what I'm trying to validate here. So that's it guys. We are done with writing the simple test where we are doing the API mocking from the HR file. Now it's a time to run this particular text, right? So by using this terminal, I'm going to run this spec file. So here I'll say npx followed by playwright test, and here I will specify the location of the spec file. So here I'll copy the relative path and I'll paste it here. So after running the test, and you'll be able to see the HR folder here. Under that HR folder, you'll be able to see the two files. One is the .hr and second one is a .bin file. So let's run the test. So our test is working now, and if you see here, so our test is passing, and on the left side, so here you can see that so HR file is generated, folder is generated, and inside that, so we have the one is a bin file which contains the data from the web page, and second one is the HR file which contains the information about the API or a web application. So once you record the HR file, so you need to set this update flag as a false. So that's it. Now let's run the same test once again, and it should get pass without any issues. And if you see here, so our test is perfectly working fine, and we are able to record the HR file. Now let's add the mocked test data inside the bin file. So far we are validating the only one data, which is strawberry is present or not in the web application, right? So let's add the mocked test data or a mocked data, and then we will verify that mocked data is present in the web page or not. So here I'll pass the very first mocked data as Playwright TypeScript by tester stock, and similarly I will add three set of test data. So it will say Playwright JavaScript by tester stock. Then here I will say third one as Cypress by tester stock. Then fourth one as API testing by tester stock. So that's it guys. So I will keep only three set of data in the web application. So rest I will delete it. So let's validate all the data. So as of now, we are validating just strawberry as a fruit. So let's assert the another four text. So simply I will go to the spec file here. So let me maximize this. So in the line number 20, just we are validating the strawberry is present or not. So let's validate the another four texts are present in the web page or not. So let's copy the text from the bin file. So here I'm making sure that mocked data is present in the web page by using the assertions. So I'm adding the second assertion. Let's add the third assertion, and then let's add the last assertion as API testing by tester stock. That's it guys. So let me format this code, and then we will run the code. So that's it guys. So let's run the test. And if you see here, so if I see my VS Code, our test is passing. And if I open the browser, so we are able to mock the 4 set of test data here, right? So strawberry is already present in the web page, right? And on top of that, so we are mocking the 4 set of test data or 4 texts we have added here, correct? So let's check out the report also. So if I go to the index.html report, here also our test is passing. And if I see the screenshot also, so it has captured from the our test case execution, right? So this is how you can do the API mocking from HAR files in Playwright.